What's up, everybody? The Existential Stoic Podcast here, episode 3 with Randy and Danny. Today we're talking about a much requested topic, not by you guys in particular, but if you listen back to the first episode we did, we looked through the top questions, philosophical questions asked on Google by the 50 states. And there were two kind of topics that came up over and over again.
Kind of as you might expect.
Yeah. One being the meaning of life, and the other being death.
Oh.
So today we're going to take a look at the meaning of life and death and how this impacts us.
Yeah, we'll tackle these two simple problems and really give you answers that are concrete, I imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is, I think this will be an interesting conversation for you guys because it's something that, at least myself, it crosses my mind on a regular basis. When I'm not thinking about what is the meaning of life, I'm also thinking about death because I work as a veterinarian. And so, like, for example, yesterday had 3 pets that I euthanized and one that came in dying and died on the table within a couple minutes of presentation. And it's just,
it's impossible not to think about it, right?
Yeah.
And like, you know, you've actually talked to me about this too, because you were struggling with the euthanization process itself and the act of it. You know, it's interesting too, having to do, you know, your job requires you to take the life of other creatures, living things, right? And I don't know about you, but most people, we don't want to kill something, right?
Yeah.
I think most of us feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's a difficult, interesting job, I think, because, you know, you're doing something beneficial too. You're helping them in a way, and you're helping the families because, you know, they're suffering, but you are responsible, right? And, you know, it's interesting. I don't know.
Yeah. So what I noticed is that, you know, in the moment when I'm doing it, it doesn't really impact me that much. You know, like when I'm working to save the life of an animal and it dies, or when I have to euthanize an animal, it doesn't really impact me. But it's later on that day or later on that week when I actually have some spare time to like think about that stuff that I feel the effect of it, and kind of I start questioning. Yeah,
do you think it's because, you know, so in the moment, right, like, you know, well, I guess I have 2 questions. One is, you know, is there a difference between like when you lose an animal and you're working on it, doing a surgery or something, versus euthanasia? Is there a difference in how you feel or how you think about it at the time? And then the other question, I guess, would be, you know, like, you're also doing something at the time, so you're talking with the family, you're dealing with, you know, their own, they have a lot of, you know, emotions surrounding the animal and everything, and you're talking them through this process, or you're operating, you're doing something, right? So at the time it makes sense, I guess, maybe that you don't think about it right away.
Yeah, there's definitely a difference between euthanizing an animal and an animal dying, and the main difference is that it's not me doing it. You know?
Yeah, well, no, yeah, you're not directly like, it's not your responsibility, I guess, in a sense.
Because I mean, we've talked about with euthanizing animals how it's like their quality of life isn't there. It's the last kindness that I can do for them. It's really tough for the owners, for myself, for basically everyone involved, but it's in the best interest of the animal. But it's still me injecting them. It's still me technically pulling the trigger, and that's the difficult part that I have with it. Like, I mean, at this point in my career, I've euthanized thousands of animals, and I think any veterinarian who's done it for as long as I have, probably along the same lines as that, and it just becomes part of the routine. But there's a definite difference when you're trying to save an animal's life and it dies, and it's like, you know what? I couldn't save that one. I did the best that I could.
Did all you could with the resources you had. Yeah, it's not.
There's actually no hard feelings. There's no mental struggle associated with that.
You weren't directly trying to kill it either. You were trying to save it. Some things you just can't. You know, you can't do everything, right? That would be ridiculous to think that way.
But then on the other hand, on the other flip side of that animal dying thing, they say that like every veterinarian is going to have at least one animal that they're responsible for their death. Like they were doing surgery on it and it died, or they sedated it and it died, or they gave it medications that had a reaction and it died. And that stuff, I think, comes with a little bit more of a psychological burden.
No, that's interesting, because you kind of, because of maybe like either not even a mistake, but just not knowing certain things.
You see tens of thousands of patients in a year. Like what statistically the chances are it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. They might have a reaction, and these aren't people. Their hospital records are different. They might not even have any, you know, like you don't know what you're walking into.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's interesting. Yeah. And you know, it's interesting too, because I think like the being responsible for the death, like you're doing the physical action. But it's interesting too, because you think about it and you reflect on it, and like you even expressed concern about it. But I know from my standpoint, I know like the families are probably happy to have you. It's a help that as the individual you're going to struggle. I mean, doing yourself, right? And you're not going to do it yourself because you could mess up. There's all sorts of problems with that. But it's interesting too, because you are taking a life, and it's that's a difficult thing, right?
And the hardest part of it for me is seeing the ease in which it is done, like the fragility of life, how there's really like it's like we're literally living on like a hair's breadth. Like that's the difference between life and death. Like literally one injection. I give injections of anti-inflammatory medications all the time. I give injections of antibiotics, but you give injection of euthanasia solution, and that separates life and death, like that right there.
That is interesting. Yeah, it's like one injection, boom, that's it.
Yeah.
And it's pretty instant. I mean, I've had to be there when animals were put down, and it is very quick. It's insane. Yeah, when you think about it too, that is kind of our lives are, and we think of ourselves. We don't think of death all the time either, right? So we think of ourselves as kind of having this persistence over time. And we don't sort of, it makes sense that we don't think about death all the time, our own death, but still, we kind of think of ourselves as having this sort of like armor, right? And like invincibility, right? Or something like that, when in fact it really isn't required, much isn't required. Yeah. It's very easy.
Yeah, survival is a given nowadays. Like you don't have to find food, you just go to the corner store and get it, or order it on your phone. You don't have to fight with other people to survive in many places. Like survival is a given nowadays.
I mean, if you think about it, in most of our communities, we have a lot of security. I mean, it's pretty safe. You can leave. I mean, you lock your car and leave stuff in it, and or you sit in your car, you feel safe, you feel secure, you have walls around you, but it's just it's
that's
glass.
it. And the funny thing is, that's like a superficial security.
Yeah.
Like anybody with a hairpin can pick the lock on most people's front doors.
Yeah,
and yet that's like the superficial security.
Or we lock our doors
has.
and we put deadbolts, but like the window is easy to smash. Any window can break. It's kind of interesting. It's like that sense of security, not necessarily real security, right? That feeling of safety, not necessarily actual. But then again, you're also, how often do you expect that to happen, and how often does it happen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of, we're all committed to that. But so life and death then, huh? That's what we're talking about.
So the meaning of life and death.
Where should we?
And I think
they're connected.
100%, because one only exists because its opposite exists.
Yeah.
Like I've been reading the Tao Te Ching, and that's all about.
I love the Tao Te Ching. It's a great book.
The opposites, because one thing cannot exist without its counterpart.
And
so life,
changing states, right? The transitioning quality, not really being separate but linked together, right?
Yeah.
That they are, like you said, and it's interesting too, because we can't have life without death. It's a part of it, but so many of us don't accept it as that part of that reality, right? Or we, and speaking of animals, right? Like recognize that maybe our animal needs to be put down, but not doing it because we're afraid of losing them. We're afraid, or we have too many questions about is it the right time and so forth and so on. And extending that, and not that that's it happens. Look, I'm not blaming anyone. I've done it myself, right? It's just hard to do it and separate that out and admit that this is the time.
Yeah. And so with this duality of life and death, kind of somebody said that men are living lives of quiet desperation, and I think
oh my God,
partially like because it's so easy to survive, people get into a routine where their life doesn't feel like living anymore, and then they contemplate dying.
Yeah, this is interesting. It's one of the big focus points really of like all existential literature, which is the idea of really living your life, right? And really living your own life, because if we don't think about it and we just go through the routines, it's so easy to get caught up in like our day-to-day, to get caught up in planning for what we think we should do down the line, that we kind of miss what we're doing, and we don't even realize that we're not even making choices on our own, right? And that's also interesting, like the difference between living your own life versus living a life that like maybe you think you should live because of social pressures or whatever, all those factors that kind of force us or encourage us to be a certain way.
So how do you handle that when you get stuck in the day-to-day grind and it just seems like life is the same monotonous progression of nothing?
Of nothing. I don't know, it's tough. I personally have dealt with, I think, like, anxiety and and panic issues over things like that, where if I get caught in sort of the routine like that, I start to think things are meaningless. And I start to get disinterested in things, and everything seems to lose its value. And I've gotten a lot better at catching myself, and I think that's a big important point, is to recognize it. I find that if I recognize it, I can change my perspective by changing my situation. So doing something else, doing something fun, right? And kind of making a decision on my own to do something that's separate from what I normally would do, right? Changing the day for my own reasons, then I feel like I have more control, or I'm more invested in it. Because it is easy to lose yourself, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to kind of just like, you're paying attention to so many things seemingly outside of you. You're focused on information, social media, the news, whatever, your day-to-day job, your routine, family, all these obligations that are existing outside of us, and you don't really think about you, how you feel, what you're doing, and before you know it, you can be doing all this stuff that you didn't intend to do, or didn't even mean to do, right? It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And problematic.
Yeah, they say man gets distracted from his greatness because he gets lost in so many secondary pursuits.
It's interesting too, because I was thinking about just this the other day. When we focus on planning too, and there is this sort of emphasis that we need to, we throughout our lives, right? Especially when we're younger, you're going to school, so there's always that next goal of the semester ending, the year ending, the next grade, then moving to the next building, from middle school to junior high to high school, then to college or whatever. There's this sort of path that you're taking that seems like it's fixed, and I think it makes us plan in a way that we look down the road, and when we're planning like that, we're focused on goals, but we're not really focused on what we're doing in the interim. You know what I mean? You can kind of almost get distracted by the end, and you don't live.
Yeah. And you think that at the end there's some pot of gold. That's where it is. I get caught in that all the time. Where
I'll feel better when I graduate high school. I'll feel good. I'll be happy then, and I'll be less stressed. Or when I get this job, or
when I finally learn this thing, when I finally pay off that, when I do that,
when I finally get my house or whatever, right? All these sort of life goals that we set for ourselves, we think, oh man, once I get that, that's it. We're good, right? But you're not.
Never is. Never is. I think I told you this before, where I have a clear memory from undergrad where I was like, once I'm a veterinarian, then I'll be happy. That'll be it. And that was the biggest crock of BS.
Well, it's funny though, but I think everybody goes through that, right? I mean, I've done that to myself too. I think, I look at these because it seems reasonable, right? Because at the moment, the thing you're focused on is getting that goal, right? And it's but it's so easy to lose the rest of your life, to even forget about living. I was listening to this is a long time ago, so I don't remember what the show was, but they were talking about hobbies and the importance of having hobbies, right? And having things that you just enjoy doing, that maybe you don't get there's no necessary payoff, benefit, financial. And they're talking about how most adults in the US don't really have hobbies because they think of everything in terms of making money and profit. So they only do things if there's a direct payoff financially, unless they need to, it's an obligation, family, whatever. And they were saying that that's very detrimental to your life, obviously, because you're not really, you're focused on making money, but you're kind of forgetting why you're doing it, almost, right? You're not enjoying anything in the meantime. Or it's people who, they say, I remember kids in grad school, I had a couple friends who were going to be lawyers. I was in grad school for philosophy. They were going to law school afterwards. And they were like, yeah, it'll be great. I'll work 60, 70 hours a week at first, but then when I retire, I can do whatever I want because I'll have a ton of money. And it's but what if you don't make it to retirement? Or what if the economy changes? Or what, there's so many other factors that could.
Or what if you spend 30, 40 years of your life working in a routine, and that becomes a habit, and you actually, even though you may not know it, your body enjoys that habit, and then you retire and you're miserable.
Yeah, because you don't have all this stuff. Go ahead, sorry.
Because you don't have those loops that provide pleasure for you, even though you know they're there.
You define self-worth that way, right? I mean.
Yeah, I work with a veterinarian in his 70s. He's been doing it for a long, long time. And he still works harder than anybody else because he's been doing it for the past 50 years. And that's a defined habit. And I don't think he wants to retire because he knows that he'll probably be bored. Yeah,
you'll be bored. And the other thing is too, it's how we define too our own self-worth. A lot of times we tie it to productivity. And when it's especially jobs like that where your productivity kind of defines your whole value, how can you stop? The other issue too is, and I said this to one of my friends, I was not to mention too, you are able and capable now. When you retire, you're going to be older, so you might not have the ability to do the things that you could do when you were younger, and you're banking on being in the same health, being actually enjoying, because there's things you want to do in your life that you might not want to do later in life, but they're still important, right? There's trips you might want to take or whatever, and it's interesting, we don't think these things through, I think, in a way that makes sense sometimes.
Yeah. There's so many examples I'm thinking of now where it just says that, it's the journey that's important. The end is great for a direction, but it's the journey that's actually important. And, you could get the whole world, but what's the purpose of having the whole world and losing your soul in the process? And life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. Like all these examples of focus on what's happening right now. And, suffer through it, because there's going to be problems, there's going to be suffering. But if you have a strong enough why, a reason for your suffering, then I think that gives enjoyment to it.
Well, that's the interesting question too. If we're talking about the meaning of life, it's what gives life meaning, and that can be, sometimes people think of that in terms of like, what's the purpose of existence, right? Or what makes life meaningful from like sort of like an external point of view, not from the individual standpoint, but in general. So like, believing in a divine entity, right? And a divine plan, that can sort of add a sense of purpose to existence, but that purpose is outside of you. It's there regardless of whether you exist or not, right? And you might believe you play some part in that, but I think without that, and I think a lot of people find themselves in this position today, right? That without that sort of view of the world, where do you find meaning in life? How do you find meaning, and how do you define it is a very important question that I think a lot of people don't ask themselves honestly. Because, what makes you, I guess another way to think of that is what makes your life meaningful, right? And are you really invested in your life? Are you invested in the decisions you're making? Are you living in a way that is really, truly right for you and right for the type of person you are?
Do you believe in what you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, that's
who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. And like, do you think about it? I mean, like, I was talking to you earlier today about Sartre. I was thinking about his conception of radical freedom, and it's interesting because we do things all the time in our actions. Every action we perform, no matter how small or how grand, right? It comes with it conveys to the world a set of values and beliefs about things, right? Whether, I'm picking a jar of strawberry jam off the shelf at the grocery store, right? It says I value this, I like this more than the others, I'm making a decision. Or I'm doing something like, I don't know, charity work, or supporting some sort of physician or whatever, advocating for something, right? Those actions say something to the world and say something about me. And I think, if we don't think about this and don't consider the weight of that, we run the risk of doing things and supporting values and beliefs that we otherwise really wouldn't. Or maybe, even not being honest with ourselves about what we actually do believe or do value.
Yeah, and all of these things like require time to think about. Like, these existential questions and problems only exist because we have the time to actually think about them now. Like, nowadays is like, it's the time of the existential crisis.
It
like
really
everybody's having, but it's because life has become so simple. Like, we don't have to work in the field for 16 hours a day.
Yeah.
We have this time to actually think about this stuff, and we have these resources and this information overload to where you can basically go down these rabbit holes and just
so easily. Yeah, you can lose yourself on any topic, right? And this is one of the other issues too, because if we're all looking for meaning, if we're all looking for a meaningful life, we're all looking for meaning in the world, part of that is also, right, understanding our existence, making it intelligible to ourselves, right, in some way. And so you have all this information and you have all these external ideas about meaning, interpretations of events or things, and you're trying to work through all of it to figure out what it means. It is overload, right? You're overwhelmed by the possibilities, by the, all the ideas, and then, you have to kind of take that step back, I think, and really think it through on your own.
Yeah, and there's a lot of second guessing that goes on, where you're like, I want my life to mean this, but will it actually? Or I want to do this, but can I actually do that? And it's like, what about acting as if you were bound to succeed? Like, as if what you actually want is destined for you and will happen. because they say that doubt is the devil's best tool.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
you know, you can just put that wedge of doubt in there and it just eats away at you. But like, what happens if your life could actually be everything that you wanted it to be?
Well, you know what's funny? It's just like you had mentioned this, I think, last time, but you said when you're doing something, you feel happy, right? And then somebody asks you if you're happy. Well, that's like the wedge of doubt, right? Because like all of a sudden now they questioned you. You felt happy, you thought you were happy, and then somebody says, "Are you happy?" Now you stop and think about it, you question it, and maybe you're not, right? Because that raises that issue. That is like that whole idea. I mean, that little bit of doubt can totally destroy it. And it's true. I mean, they've done studies, right? Like positivity, optimism, whatever you want to call it, right? Any of this idea of like, you're going to be fine and do well. You enjoy what you're doing. That sort of level of engagement, I think, does have a huge impact on how well we're doing and how we feel.
Yeah.
But the issue of meaning is interesting, though, because I don't know if that itself won't give you meaning in the world. Help you feel better.
Yeah. Well, I think... Okay, so this whole idea of meaning in life. What's the meaning of life? These types of questions, like, presuppose that it's not already there.
Yeah.
And that's like such a nuance, and so it's like defeating in its purpose. Like, what's the meaning of my life? What if your life already has all the meaning it needs?
What if existing is meaningful in itself?
You're
right?
alive.
Yeah.
You're alive.
Yeah.
Like, there it is. There's the meaning of your life.
It's funny, it's, I think Nietzsche said at one time that life needs no argument, right? Like that it couldn't be better or worse. It just is.
Yeah.
Like existence just is. And, we're the conscious entities, the subjects, doing all this evaluation, all this judgment, making all these sort of decisions and comparing things, and we're missing maybe that it just is. And to exist is okay. It's a good thing. That's like, it's almost like the, you see a lot of people talk about being grateful now as, crucial to feeling better and living a better life and finding meaning in life, because I think the distractions, the information, we get all these representations of success that are, the very few without a lot of background information. We assume, people are happy, they're wealthy without really knowing anything. And it kind of puts us in a position where it's very hard to sort of, I think, parse out what we really feel and what we're just sort of being exposed to on a regular basis and taught to think, right?
And also with instant gratification, it makes gratitude such a thing. Like, you expect things to be easy. You expect things to be instantaneously. Like, literally 10 years ago, there was a time where you order something online and it took 2 to 4 weeks to arrive.
Yeah.
And now if it's not there the next day, everybody's up in arms.
Even the same day, depending on what you order. Yeah, we don't have patience for really anything anymore. And we expect these things to be absolutely as fast as possible. I mean, think about the last time you had to wait in line for something. Or, at a light. You get frustrated almost instantaneously. It's insane.
Like, I heard that we have microwave expectations when we live in a crock-pot type of universe.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah. It's just like we expect stuff to be now, and it's guaranteed to happen if you focus on it, but it just takes a while.
Well, that's the thing I struggle with, oh my God, all the time. And it's like a constant thing I have to remind myself, right? I have these things I want to do. I have projects, plans, or even just like working on myself, right? And I get this idea in my head of what it'll look like or be like, or what the outcome will, how it'll be. And I get frustrated when it doesn't happen the next day, and it's an insane thing to be frustrated at, because I know also that it can happen the next day. It's like exercising, and like I expect, tomorrow I'll have a six-pack. That's not gonna happen, dude. From without doing anything else and without working on it for a long time. I mean, it's insane. So, these expectations are kind of crazy that we put on ourselves and put on the world, and it's a huge source of our stress. But I think is it also, I don't know, is it tied to like this feeling of, maybe it is tied to death too, a feeling of time, and the sense of time, because when we talk about the meaning of life, it's also about living life, right? And we all know that there is an end to it. We don't know when. Maybe that is part of it. Like,
that's a giant paradox that I flip-flopping
Oh my God,
back and forth between my head.
every fucking day.
Like Marcus Aurelius said, stop living life as if you have 1,000 years to live. Because you're here today, you're gone today. You never know when you're going to go. But, so like, you want stuff to be done now. But at the same time, it takes time to do anything worthwhile.
Well, you know, it's interesting too, because, you know, those kind of like, those sayings, right?
Mm-hmm.
That, like, you know, like live for the day, or, you know, carpe diem or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Marcus Aurelius's claim, you know, that we should live like, you know, we don't have like 1,000 years. It's good because it kind of, I think they get you to focus on the moment, right? Engage in the moment, really thinking about what I want to do now, rather than like, you know, putting off what I should be doing or what I want to do. But yeah, you're right, because it also has this implication that it needs to be done now too, or at least we interpret it that way. I don't know that he necessarily did, but, you know, yeah.
Well, like, what would have happened in 1,000 years back then happens in like 2 years now.
Yeah.
Like, look at all the technological revolutions that went on at the time of Marcus Aurelius. It was probably like, I don't know, figuring out how to better cultivate wheat. Like, that was the technological revolution of his whole entire life.
Yeah.
Whereas nowadays, we've gone from giant computers the size of a room to desktop computers to laptop computers to computers on our phone more powerful than something that theoretically put a rocket in space.
Yeah. They always say that comparison, right? I always hear that in your pocket right now is more computing power than all the computers on Earth when they put a man on the moon. It's like,
well, dude, my first job, I did contracting work for NASA. I went down into a basement at NASA down in Greenbelt, Maryland, and they showed me these huge computers that they used to shoot satellites up back in 1983.
and they're gigantic.
And they had this like VHS tape that was the size of a giant suitcase. And like this desk tape had way less capacity than
Probably
what's
like
on
a
your phone.
megabyte.
Yeah.
If they were lucky. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absurd the technology they had to work with back then.
Well, no, it's an interesting point, right? We see, and you know what? I think there's more people. We also forget too, like, you go back in time. Well, one, there was less people. But there wasn't formal education. There was a lot less educated people. So these big breakthroughs were also not happening in wide scale. Now you look at the world, right? There's breakthroughs every day all over the world because there's tons of people working on different problems. And I think, you know, so it is like, that can also be kind of defeating for the individual too, though, right? Because you look around, you see all this stuff happening. It's like, how can I do this and be successful?
Yeah.
Or, you know, you get like,
dude, the paradoxes again. Like, I think education is on one hand the best thing, and on the other hand the worst thing, because now we have all these absolutely brilliant people who are too afraid of messing up or being wrong that they'll never take any action.
Yeah, that idea of failure that holds us back, it blocks us, it keeps us from taking chances. You know, and we get comfortable with our lives no matter how good or bad, right? And like, we're afraid of taking chances because that means change. But if we don't take those chances and we don't, you know, we have to embrace failure just as much as success. It's part of the process. Nobody succeeds on the first attempt and creates something perfect.
Yeah. Talking about things they always talk about, Thomas Edison, 1,000 times to get a light bulb right, or 10,000 times, or whatever it was. And it's just feedback. But it's hard feedback.
It is hard. And, you know, we talk about a meaningful life, and you think of all these other factors, like these expectations, the instantaneous gratification, all of these things kind of put pressure on us, right? And cause us to sort of, I think, derail ourselves from our goals and from the things that we really want.
Yeah.
I guess what we're kind of suggesting here too is also, I mean, like, a meaningful life, it has to be, part of it has to be pursuing what you want, right?
Yeah.
Pursuing a life that you want.
Yeah.
I mean, Kierkegaard said, right, when you choose, your personality has to be invested in the choice, right? It has to be something that you feel passionate about, connected to, that you want to do.
Yeah, whenever I mean, because I get stuck at least once a year and like mired in a bog of mud. But whenever I do that, what's always really helpful is to sit down and brainstorm about what I would do. Like, if I could do anything, have anything, be anything, go anywhere, and money was no concern. Like, I think what stops a lot of people is money. Oh, I can't do that because I gotta have a real job. I have people to take, but it's like
401k.
yeah,
Blah, blah,
it's
blah,
like,
yeah.
well, let's just play a game. You know, what would be awesome if money didn't matter? Like, what would you just love to wake up and do every single day? Doesn't matter if your family approves of it. Doesn't matter if you can't afford to do it.
The important thing too is if money's not an issue too, it doesn't matter if you conceive of it as making money either. I think that's an important consideration as well, right? Just what would you love to do every day?
Yeah.
What would be something that was like made you happy, that made you feel good?
Yeah. And it's so crazy. You see all these people who have started their own businesses, and you ask them about it, and they're like, well, I just started something because that's what I believed in, that's what I wanted to do. And it was hard and there were struggles, but eventually money came. And like, I look at something that I did. I started a YouTube channel just for fun, and I was like, let's see if I could do this. Let's see what happens if I make a video a day. I'll try a video a day. Okay, did that for a month, then 2 months, then 6 months, then a year, and the channel took off. And for a couple years, I was able to travel the world just from the money that I made from YouTube.
Yeah, you got a lot out of it. But you know, importantly too, I think what you said there too, you know, you said you didn't start with, you know, I'm gonna make a YouTube channel that's gonna blow up.
Nope.
You started with, I'm gonna do a video a day. You set a very small, manageable goal. Because that still is a lot of work. It is.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't underplay that either. But you know, right, you set out a goal that was manageable, and I think that's also important. We look at we think about what would make us happy, like using that like thought experiment, right? Like, what if I could do anything, what would I do? Would it be starting a business? Would it be, you know, whatever, writing or whatever you would do? But we think of the end product, and then it seems unachievable, right? Because it's like you're thinking of a finished product. You're not thinking of all the steps, the little steps involved that you can do. Like a book is a sentence at a time, right? Or a word at a time.
Yep.
You know, your channel, like you created a whole channel by making one video at a time.
Exactly.
You didn't make 600 and then publish it. That would be ridiculous.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people, so like we were looking at these questions that people asked in a bunch of states, and they were asking like, what's the meaning of life? Should I kill myself? What happens when you die? And like all these things. And I think potentially those questions come about when people are at kind of a confused moment in their life. They feel stuck. They feel like everything's too big of a hurdle. And really at those times kind of asking like, what's one thing I can do today that will improve my life?
Yeah.
And just taking that one action, that one thing that you can do today to make your life better. Because it doesn't matter if you have the grandest plans ever if you're not actively implementing them.
Yeah, if you're not actively implementing them, and if it's not something you really want to do, it will fail. That's the other important thing, I think. If you're doing something for the wrong reasons, it's not going to work.
Yep.
But if it's something you really want to do and you break down it into actionable things that you can actually accomplish, you will be able to get it done. It is possible.
Yep.
You just have to stick with it.
Yeah, step by step.
It's funny though too, because you know we all have those times. I mean, God, I've had them so many times where you feel like you feel almost like it's hard to describe it, right? Like there's no meaning. You feel detached, or you feel like isolated. You know, and it's funny because you know you're hyper focusing on yourself. Everybody goes through these experiences, and like you said, I think getting one thing accomplished can be so much, and it can make things so much better. You realize that it's possible. And it's, you know, it's funny. Meaning in life is so interesting though, because I think it's so hard to define sometimes, because I think it's different for everybody. Maybe we have to make our own meaning. I think that is part of it. It's finding out what you want, what makes it work. I don't know.
Yeah, like for instance, just to give you guys an example, if you're in that spot. Not too long ago, I was in a spot like that where I had some chronic neck and back issues, and I was like, I'm going to take care of these things medically. So I got MRIs, I saw a doctor, I saw a neurologist, I saw an orthopedic surgeon.
Oh yeah, you were doing that for a while.
Yeah, and they basically, all of them gave me not great answers about what's going to happen. All right? And it really
terrible answers.
It really put me in a bad spot. And they put me on medications, and the medications weren't working. They just made me feel worse, made me feel like anxiety and all this type of stuff. And I just was going down a rabbit hole of there's no possible outcome for it. There's no possible good outcome for it.
Yeah, every outcome is terrible, right? No matter what.
Yeah, and then my dad said to me, you know, I had something similar happen to me, and I went to physical therapy and acupuncture for it, and it resolved. And so I was like, And that moment gave me some optimism. Gave me, you know, maybe things are terrible, but let's see what happens if I put in as much effort as I can in the right direction. So I started going to physical therapy and acupuncture and a chiropractor and doing exercises and stretches at home and hanging upside down and doing yoga and doing foundation training and doing everything I could, like every day, just doing what I could to improve. Not focusing on the actual result, but saying, what can I do today to actually get better?
And the outcome will be better.
And since I've done that, it's been such a massive improvement.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I mean, there's still pain every day, but it's like, hey, listen, I can see over this period of time I've made that much of an improvement. I can just keep on going, keep on improving, doing what I can each day. And I think that's a parallel to life. Like, what can you do to move towards the good and move away from the bad?
Yeah, because when we look, and I think, you know, we had talked about this before, and you raised a good point. That example too was trying something that you didn't think about before, also like acupuncture and stuff, which you immediately thought of, you know, going to doctors, going to hospitals, and, you know, trying something different is also important, and looking outside of where you might normally look for answers, because you'll find things you didn't even imagine, right, or didn't think possible, and sometimes they work. It's interesting, you know, and we also look at our lives too, and I think we look back and we compare ourselves, you know, when we make judgments about how we're doing and our own meaning, we compare ourselves to others sometimes rather than ourselves. And we talked about this, I think, maybe before, but, like, you know, the idea of looking at your life and asking yourself, you know, am I better off now than I was before in my own life? You know, in terms that I understand that are relevant to my meaning. Then I think, you know, because I find myself struggling a lot of times when I think, you know, oh my God, I'm not going to get where I want to be, and, you know, how am I ever going to complete, so forth, you know, these projects I want. And then I look at my life and I think, I am in a much better spot now. So, I mean, in terms of me, I'm doing better. That's good, right? That's improvement, and that's meaning and value right there.
Yeah. And then maybe some of you out there are listening, you're like, well, my life is the worst that it's ever been. This happened, that happened. I mean, Steve Harvey, I heard him talking about how you can mess your life completely up. You can jack your life up completely and still get it back together and still do okay. You know, you can still be doing fine. Like, you could literally be at the worst moment of your life. You could be at the rock bottom. And guess what? That's a pretty good spot to be, because from there, there's only
get better. Yeah,
you can only go up.
As soon as you put work into it, you can always improve it.
Yeah.
And the crazy part is, too, I think, you know, one of the other things that, you know, we're both in our later 30s, and one of the things that always is also an issue is time, right? We imagine ourselves, and, like, again, I compare myself to others. I think about other people at my age or in my age bracket, and I'll think to myself, oh, I'm doing terrible, or blah, 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 you know, I don't have any value, whatever. I don't have, you know, I'm not succeeding in my life the way I want to. But in reality, there's always time, too, to change, right? There's always time to change your job, change careers, change your path, find what's right for you. There's always that time to work on, as long as you're alive.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, basically.
Yeah. And, I mean, there's so many examples of people who really didn't hit their stride until later on in their life. Yeah. Like, really, from age 40 to 60... according to the book Think and Grow Rich, is like the prime time of your life. And most people think you're over the hill at that point.
I know, it's crazy, right?
That's the time when you finally hit your stride. Like, you look at all these examples. Colonel Sanders from KFC, it wasn't until he was in his late 60s. Ray Kroc from McDonald's in his 50s. You know, so all these people not really hitting their strides. But right now we have these, you know, we see these rappers, and we see
the tech boom too. You see young kids getting lucky with a program, and it takes a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. I'm not diminishing that, but you see individuals getting very lucky and, you know, young, and then they, you know, their companies blow up to, you know, billions and billions of dollars, and that seems like, you know, how could I ever get there? Yeah. But, you know, that's not necessary either.
Yeah, and that can potentially be a huge curse. Like, a blessing when you're not ready for it can be a huge curse. Because, I mean, imagine you're a young kid and you're 18 years old, like Justin Bieber, or he was like 14 or something. He became a multi-millionaire.
A billion.
And then for the rest of his life, he never knows if people are actually his friends.
Yeah.
Or just hanging out with him because he's got money.
Yeah, there's burdens tied to everything, I think. And, you know, and if we're not prepared to really think about it, and if we're not living our own life, you know, and it's hard. It is hard living sometimes. It's very difficult because we're conscious, right? We question things. We question ourselves. We compare ourselves to what's outside all the time.
Yeah.
And, you know, that creates a lot of burden for us. And I think it's important to remember, you know, to keep in mind that, like, change can be a good thing, right? We shouldn't be afraid of it. And we got to try things. If we don't do anything, we'll always be in the same spot we're in.
Yeah.
If you at least do something, right, you'll make progress.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll find a way. And I think failure is a big one, though. Not being afraid to fail, or, you know, understanding, too, you learn from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
You learn from mistakes, you learn from failure, and you can utilize that rather than looking at it as a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And
everybody has failures in their life, but when you look back, they're never that big after a number of years.
No, or, you know, it's funny too, or you'll end up interpreting them when you look back as a turning point, a transition point, right? Even really, I mean, like we talked about rock bottom, even really detrimental things end up, you know, being a point of departure for you to a different life, one that was right for you, and that's valuable, right? I mean,
yeah, like every time in my life I've experienced depression, it's given me that much deeper compassion for other people who are suffering.
yeah, absolutely.
You know? And it's so difficult to gauge pain. It's like, it's funny, like when I went to the doctor because I was in pain, he's like, we have no way to judge pain. And I'm thinking, as a veterinarian, we have a whole thing called the Glass Cow Pain Score for evaluating pain in animals. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You can't evaluate pain in people. This is ridiculous. You know?
And of course you can.
Yeah. And, but yeah, it's difficult. Like, just looking at people walking around. Like, I saw an old guy limping through the mall today. And from looking at him, you can't actually gauge pain, but you can see how he's walking and how his posture. And it's like, he's probably in pain right now, and I can't see it.
You can't see it, and the difficulty is that he might be in pain, but he might be in less pain relative to what he was before. I mean, you don't know the individual. That's the other issue, right? And their own tolerances. You know, they use that scale in the hospital, right? The 0 to 10 thing, or the frowny face, the smiley face, and even that, because it's subjective, right? It's what can the individual deal with right now, and certain pains are worse than others. Like, I know for a lot of people, mouth pain is very difficult to ignore, right? Your tooth, something like that, is very hard to not focus on, whereas like a pain in your arm or leg might be easier to kind of, you know, push aside and kind of ignore and move on a little bit. Yeah, it's interesting.
So the meaning of life and death. My answer would be, it's whatever you make of it. You know, like I'm a big believer of the saying, whether a man thinks he can or he can't, either way he's right. And I think that kind of in life, it all comes down to what you really, really want. Maybe not consciously want, but subconsciously want.
Well, what you want and what you think, right? And how you think. And perhaps that's one of the issues now, too, with information is, you know, we were talking about this last time, you know, we're told daily on you know, constantly throughout the day, you're told that it's uncertain times, that it's the most important time ever, right? The most important election ever. You're told that they're trying times. You're told to act smart or be smart. You're given all these ideas constantly reinforced.
So many people are out of jobs. Everybody's dying. You're not safe. You're not secure. You don't know. Uncertain times, trying times. Yeah,
when you're told that constantly, obviously you're going to think that's the case. And I mean, you know, in a certain sense, maybe it is, but constantly reinforcing it is not helping.
Yeah. And honestly, we're kind of living in the best of times too. I mean,
you can also argue that too. There is an argument for that.
Look at that. You can literally go most places in many countries and not be killed.
Yeah.
Not be imprisoned for your thoughts or beliefs. You can, I mean, just the freedom, the liberty that's available in the world today. You have access to an unlimited amount of information at your fingertips if you have a mobile device. Anything connected to the internet. You could literally get any information anywhere. I mean, just look at Pornhub. You can literally watch hours and hours of any type of porn that you would be interested in, whereas before you would have to go to like a creepy newsstand and then like feel really guilty about buying a magazine.
The old days.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, no, it is interesting though, because I think one of the difficulties we deal with now is we live in a 24/7 news cycle. Everybody is trying to get your attention. Everything has to be dramatic in order to get your attention because everything else is, right? So everything has to be oppositional. It has to be, this or that. You have to be a part of this group or not, right? and it's like there's no nuance. Everything is one or the other, and it's insane because life is not like that.
Yeah.
Right? Life is complex. Life is nuanced. Most people are not one thing or the other. You know, they're not Republican or Democrat.
Dude, and it's not even comparing one thing or the other. It's not comparing like apples and oranges. It's like comparing apples and Maseratis.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, like,
it's like
it doesn't even make any fucking sense.
Yeah, so like no matter what you choose, you're always going to be wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like we were sitting outside of a Baby Gap earlier today, and they have a children's T-shirt that says "Vote." Like we were talking about, why is it so important that people vote right now? And it's crazy because it's just like this push to make people vote is really just a push to polarize people. And they want to polarize people because it's really great for business.
Well, you know what's funny too? Even that idea of like putting your kid in a shirt that says, you know, vote, or like all these signs that say vote, you know, it's kind of funny because when you think about it, depending on your standpoint, your political leaning, you're going to interpret that slightly differently, right? And so it is naturally kind of a polarizing thing, because when you see it, you're going to think, yeah, I should vote because we got to get him out of office, or yeah, I should vote because 4 more years, or whatever, right? You're naturally, it's going to polarize people, pull them apart, but that's in a sense, that's what they want, right? Because that keeps people engaged, interested in the BS, and like, you listen to the news, I mean, they say the same thing over and over.
Like, I wonder so much why there's such a strong push to get people to vote. Like, why it actually matters. Like, shouldn't people want to vote? Shouldn't they want to contribute? Like, why do they have to actually contribute to convince people to contribute?
Well, that's the funny thing, right? You know, it's this idea that, you know, it's we have a right to vote, you know, you're exercising your right. You live in a society where you're able to exercise that choice, you know, so the individual really should do it because they want to, not because they feel pressure to or forced to or whatever. And it does sort of feel like that's the case this year, right? That they're trying to kind of make people feel like they have to do this.
Yeah.
That it's like, imperative, why? It's a command.
Why?
It's not your own decision or own choice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, this whole election season's a mess anyway. And I think but you know, I think most people probably with the coronavirus, with the pandemic going on, with this election,
in these trying times,
in these trying, uncertain times, and you know, and things have changed. Don't get me wrong. You know, like, you know, we can't go out like we normally went out before, right? You know, things have changed. You know, school was a mess starting this year. You know, people are still constantly paying attention to and nervous about the numbers, and like, that is stressful. It really is stressful. I get it. Like, it can be very difficult to feel at ease, secure, and comfortable to make decisions about how you want to live your life. And for many people too, like, you know, making decisions, it's hard sometimes when you feel like the external factors are really, like, you know, really uncertain, or, you know, tumultuous or whatever. It's difficult to make a decision because you're afraid to change things, right? Because what if I change things now and everything falls apart? Well, they're going to fall apart anyway, I guess would be the answer, right? So, you know,
sometimes if you don't act, life will act on you.
Yeah, well, it'll act for you, right? I mean, if you don't choose, that choice will be made at some point because life will move on. So you'll either miss the opportunity altogether, or, right, something will happen that will kind of force you into a decision. You know, it's funny, I think what we're leaning towards, I think, for the meaning of life is you have to create your own meaning, right? You have to make choices that are relevant to you, that matter to you. And it is hard. I think one of the crucial way to do that, I think, is to also look at information on your own. Look at both sides. Always look for diverse sets of information. You know, get a big picture, and that way you can choose what's right for you. And hopefully, you know, you'll find meaning in your life and purpose.
Yeah, and I think, like, I love that thing that, like, what would you do with your life if you could literally do anything?
It is a great way. Yeah, it's a great way to think about it.
Because why would you limit yourself? If you argue for your limitations, you're bound to have them. Why not just you know, for a moment, imagine you could have everything, and then just go after it as if it's going to happen.
You know, the power.
Because who knows, it may.
Yeah, the power of our thinking. Our control of our thoughts, the power to change how we think, is really important. And I mean, it's insane how it can change really your life. It's funny too, you know, I remember I saw somebody put a quote up from, I think it was Marcus Aurelius, about thinking about, like, mastering your thoughts and, like, controlling your mind and whatever, and then controlling your life. And somebody immediately responded, like, oh, you know, people with severe depression can't do this and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily the point. And I think anyone can work on their thinking. You can try and change it, and it's positive too. But we have a lot of control over how we think, but we also have a lot of influences from outside trying to get us to think a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And that is difficult, right? You have to work through that and stay strong with that tide, I think, and with those like sort of currents around you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anything else you'd like to say about the meaning of life and death? Oh, what happens after you die?
Ooh. And death in general, I guess we didn't really talk about too much in life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we did mention, so I think,
what happens?
As we said, I think death and life are obviously, connected.
Mm-hmm.
Some people think it's a transition. I think an important thing for meaning in life is to accept death as part of it. I think we have to do that. If we don't, I think it's difficult to live. What happens after we die, or what happens at death, is a difficult one. What do you think on that topic, honestly? I
kind of think that it's like the greatest release. I think it's like I feel it's like kind of like when you're like, because we have all this bound up energy, but it's bound in like such a small human physical form, and then when we drop that form, we just become like the expansiveness of the universe again.
It's a very beautiful way to look at it. I
Very
like that.
poetic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is very poetic.
Mm-hmm.
It's I always liked Epicurus said that when you're alive, right? You're alive, and when you die, life is not death's nothing to you, because like when you die, you're not aware anymore. Like, so life is to be aware, to sense things, and death is the cessation of that.
Mm.
And so one way to think of it is like if you think of death, think of before you were born.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the same state, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is not terrifying at all. It just is, right?
Yeah.
I always like to think of it in a way that we are kind of like, we know that like, everything will break down, the matter's recycled.
Mm-hmm.
I like to think of that because I think in some sense, everything is connected, and everything is from everything else, right? Everything that exists now is dependent upon everything that existed before.
Yeah,
and I love that idea.
Yeah, we're all stardust, and
Yeah,
all that stardust
literally
came from nothing.
Yeah.
Like the nothing creates something, and then nothing, and something, and nothing, and it's just like
It's a big recycling process,
cycle.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's scary to think like, because we are conscious beings, so for a lot of people that thought that like, your conscious self won't exist is scary, but at the same time, to me it's not, because like you said, it's like a release, right?
Yeah.
No more of these stresses tied to my physical form.
Yeah.
No more of these concerns that like, life is, don't get me wrong, I think life is amazing. It is really amazing that we're alive and talking.
Yeah.
That we're recording something is incredible, right? That we have all these abilities, that we can do all these things is really amazing. At the same time, if we shouldn't be afraid of death, because it is just, another state, and whatever it is, I think will be okay.
And also,
right?
like, if you wanna look at the value of life, like just for a moment, think about how long you're going to be dead for.
Yeah.
Versus how much of a brief period of time you're actually alive.
Well, I think that's also it, right? The idea of doing what's right for you is crucial, because this is it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I always like the existentialists because of that thinking, right? That the only thing we know is that we're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
So it's up to us to make life meaningful, and it's up to us to really like invest ourselves in it and take it seriously, because this is it.
Mm-hmm.
Not take it, and we should laugh, we should enjoy it, we should do things that we care about, because we only have one chance. What's the harm in not taking chances? I guess when you think of it that way, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference? We might as well take risks. We might as well take chances, because it's our one shot. Do it however you want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then also, I mean, kind of with the Stoic philosophy, a lot of things you just got to suffer through.
Yeah.
Like having patience. I looked up the definition of patience, and it's like the power to endure.
Yeah.
To like deal with suffering, terrible things, good things too, but dealing with a lot of suffering.
And just dealing with life, right? Sometimes you have to deal with what's going on, and you have to, it's funny, we were talking about too, like that immediate gratification. Patience is something that's worth cultivating, right? Trying to teach ourselves how to be patient, how to endure. It's impossible. It's very hard.
I can't even tell you the number of times I've looked up online
how to be patient.
How to be patient. Yeah.
Please, God, somebody tell me how to fucking be patient. Yeah, I know. It's horrible.
Yeah, it is tough, because patience is, I mean, literally, patience is just enduring.
Yeah.
Like, it's just realizing all this stuff going on is painful, it's uncomfortable, it's whatever, and just enduring through that. Just hanging on.
Getting through it because we realize we exist, we're alive, and we have to get through something sometimes, you know? And like, or we have to, you know, we have to be patient and put in the work to develop the skills or to produce the things that we want to produce or whatever to get to that next point. If we only look at the goal, if we only look at the end product, you know, we forget all the in-between stuff that's necessary.
And if you're going through hell, just keep going.
Yeah, keep trucking along, right?
Because you definitely don't want to stop there.
No, I think, though, I seriously think, though, just doing things that we're interested in doing is important. And, you know, remembering, I think that death does give life meaning, though, right? It makes it more meaningful. If we lived forever, the value would be very different.
Oh, you'd get bored.
Yeah.
You'd get bored.
And there'd be no motivation really to do anything, right? Because you have forever to do it. So it's like, why bother?
Yeah.
Whereas now, you know, when you really think about it, you know, when you really think about what you're doing at a given time, there's that sense of a sort of urgency a little bit that helps keep you focused on what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember there was something I listened to by Alan Watts where he was talking about, like,
Alan Watts is good.
Yeah, he's great. And he was saying how if we had godlike powers to where we could really create anything that we wanted in our lives, and we could live an infinite number of lives, you know, we would do that for a while. We would create the best life ever.
Oh, yeah.
And then after that, we would create, like, a heroic life. And then we would try out what the worst life would be like. And eventually we'd get to a point where we were just so tired of being able to create whatever we wanted that we'd be like, what would it be like to live a life where I questioned if everything was possible?
Yeah.
To basically be living the life we're living now.
Where if I had to work for things, if I had to do, because it'd be, you know, it's like anything. You get used to everything, right? You take it for granted and you forget to value what's there and what's right in front of you sometimes. Our own powers and own abilities. Is interesting.
Yeah, so I think in closing argument, life is what you make of it.
Absolutely.
And so is death.
Yeah.
But remember to enjoy both of them.
Try.
Enjoy life while you have it, because it's short.
Enjoy it while you have it. It is short. And remember, you know, change is a part of it. Don't be afraid for change. Don't be afraid of change. It's a good thing.
Yeah. And if you're contemplating death, totally normal to contemplate that, but talk with somebody.
Yeah.
Find a friend, family member, counselor, suicide prevention hotline, whatever it is, because it's normal to think about death. 100%.
Oh, absolutely. It'd be weird not to. We're mortal.
Yeah.
It makes total sense.
Yep, totally normal to think about it, but talk with someone else about it, because that way you can find out that you're not alone having those thoughts.
Yeah, even if you're philosophizing about it, it's good to have somebody else to talk about.
Absolutely.
Talk with.
Cool. Well, it's been a pleasure, Danny.
It's been a pleasure, Randy.
We'll catch you next week.
Good episode 3.
All right.
Yeah, we'll be back with episode 4 next week.
All right.
Peace.